Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have one of my end of the year videos. In this one I will be discussing the most disappointing books that I read in 2024. I read quite a few books this year. I read about 50 books. A significant portion of those were rereads, which I don't include for my end of the year list. So if we're just counting new books, I probably read somewhere around 35 or 40. And so I did enjoy a good number of those books. In fact, I loved a good number of those books, but there were some that I didn't really care for. And rather than calling this like the worst books that I read in 2024, I decided to go with the most disappointing, because a lot of these were books that I was very excited to read and things like that. But they just ended up falling short, and I either didn't like them or they didn't kind of appeal to me in the way that I hoped they would, or things like that. Also, before I get started on the video, because it is getting rather loud, I do apologize if there's background noise. We're getting a pretty bad rainstorm right now, but I wanted to get this video done, so I hope that's not too distracting for you. But anyways, to get into this, I have 5 books that I have selected, with actually a bonus 6 that kind of counts for this, and so I'm including it. So first things first, I have Baron and Luthien by J.R.R. Tolkien. And by the way, these are not in any particular order. They're just kind of the order that I think makes the most sense to talk about. So I'm going right into it with the classic of the genre in Tolkien. Now, I love a lot of the stuff that I have read by Tolkien. I haven't read everything that he ever did. I haven't read all like the Histories of Middle-earth and all these kind of spin-off books. But I have read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings both twice. And I've also read The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, all that stuff. I was really looking forward to this because, like I said, I love Tolkien. I read this right after I finished rereading Lord of the Rings, and I was very hopeful to enjoy it, and sadly, I wasn't quite on board with it. Now, there were things about it that I did enjoy. I enjoyed kind of the core story of this book, but the thing that brought this one down for me was that it wasn't really a novel, which is kind of what I had been expecting and hoping it would be. It was like several different versions of the same story. Some of them had different details. Some of them were written in a different format. Like one of them was written in like an epic poem type style. Some of them were written more kind of typical narrative style. And I didn't really care for that. I think if this had been just the core story, I enjoyed that a fair amount, but the book in general just didn't really do much for me. It was kind of interesting because you got to see kind of his process of working through the story in several different formats, and getting a lot of kind of behind the scenes notes and things like that, which was kind of interesting. But the book itself was, to me, a little bit of a disappointment, and is thus far probably my least favorite of Tolkien's books that I have read. Going to a much more kind of modern fantasy book here, I'm going to be talking about Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. This is the first book in the Fallen Gods series. This one I was excited about because it's a fairly popular kind of young adult fantasy book. I believe it's a young adult anyway. But yeah, it's fairly popular. I've seen a lot of booktubers talk about it. It's one that it has a good amount of ratings on like Goodreads, things like that. And also I was excited to read it because I love the cover on this book. It has a beautiful cover. So I was excited to read it, and kind of the title and the concept were very interesting to me. And this one was different from Baron and Luthien, where Baron and Luthien kind of, I enjoyed the core, the story of it, but it just kind of bored me through a lot of it. This one is similar in that I was kind of bored, but it was like a very kind of all over the place, where I loved the world building, I loved the concept, I enjoyed kind of the writing style, but I didn't find the plot that compelling early on. It did get better, I think, as it went along. And the ending was actually really, really good. I really liked the ending of this book. But then there was also like one of the main characters I just hated for most of this book. And frankly, I did not care for any of the characters all that much. But there was one character who I felt like I was supposed to like, and I just did not whatsoever. And so it was kind of an all over the place kind of book that I really wasn't sure in the end what my actual thoughts on it were, because there were some big things that I didn't really care for in this book, and there were also a lot of things that I really, really liked. So it was kind of a disappointment in that there was a lot of potential with it, with the concept. I liked the concept of the book, where it's kind of these gods, and you have these god killers who are meant to hunt down kind of the remnants of the gods because the gods are generally frowned upon and things like that. And it's a cool concept. I loved, like I said, the ending. I think the ending of this book was fantastic, and just the art direction of it and all kinds of things was really well done. But in the end, I did find it a bit disappointing. To switch gears a bit, we talked about some two fantasy books. Now we're going to talk some Star Wars. First is one that I read very recently, and that is Star Wars Battlefront Twilight Company by Alexander Freed. This one was disappointing to me because I, again, thought the concept was really interesting. I am not as much a fan of, but still very much excited to read books in Star Wars or stories in Star Wars in general that are not focused on the typical Star Wars stuff, not the Jedi versus the Sith, or not, in like Legends, like there's a lot of post-Return of the Jedi stories, so I always get excited to read something that's not that, because that's kind of the bread and butter of the EU, so to speak, is the post-Return of the Jedi stuff. So I get excited to read stuff that's outside that kind of norm. I get excited to read stuff that's not just about the Jedi and Sith, because there's so much of that in Star Wars. So this book is much more kind of the military side, focusing primarily on the rebels during or around the events of like The Empire Strikes Back. And that to me was very interesting because it would provide a different and unique kind of viewpoint. It would be kind of an interesting time period, even though we get a lot of original trilogy era stuff in Star Wars, especially nowadays. It still is an interesting portion of that time period to explore. And all that stuff, I just thought it was a very interesting conceptually, plus the idea of it being tied to the Battlefront game, especially where the first Battlefront doesn't have like a campaign story, so I was interested to see how it tied into the game in some way and all that. So there was a lot of things that I thought would be interesting about this book, and what I got was a book that I did not care about. I found it very boring. There were certain sections of this book that were very interesting. I enjoyed some of the action scenes. There was a few good chapters here and there of like character interactions and things like that, but I did not find the plot or the characters very interesting. This, I think I said in my review, this to me is kind of almost the definition of the very bare minimum average Star Wars book, where like, yes, it's set in the Star Wars universe and it follows the rebels, and it has some military stuff going on, you get some action scenes, but there's nothing really exciting or unique or interesting or standout-ish about it that really kind of compelled me. So I did find this one quite disappointing, unfortunately. Staying with the Star Wars theme here, but now moving from the current canon into the expanded universe, I have the Force Heretic trilogy from the New Jedi Order. Of course, I finished the New Jedi Order series this year, and while I love New Jedi Order broadly, and I actually especially really enjoyed a lot of the later books in the series, the Force Heretic trilogy, which is books, I think it's 15, 16, 17. It's a series, or a trilogy within the series that I was really looking forward to for two reasons. First of all, good cover art, which frankly the New Jedi Order doesn't have a ton of. I'm not a big fan of a lot of the cover art in the New Jedi Order, but I do like the covers in this trilogy. I was nearing the end of the series, so this was kind of a cool, final push towards the end of the series. And also because, and perhaps this should have been a warning to me, but a lot of people don't tend to really love the Force Heretic trilogy. It tends to be one, whenever I have talked to people who have read the series or looked into it in online spaces, tends to rank fairly low in terms of people's enjoyment of the New Jedi Order series. But I kind of adopt the viewpoint when I read books like that of, oh, maybe I'll read it and find something to appreciate in it that other people don't see. Kind of the way that I look at books like this is, if there's something that people are kind of more mixed on, something people don't like as much, I am interested in reading it because I want to see where my perspective lies on it, and hopefully come to appreciate a story that other people don't appreciate as much. It's kind of a similar reason to why with series such as, for example, The Dark Tower and Lightbringer, which are two series that I have not yet read or even started, I'm excited to read those, and excited especially to read their endings, specifically because those endings are more controversial, because I want to see where my opinion is on it, and if I can appreciate something that some other people don't necessarily enjoy. And so I kind of went into this with a similar perspective of, oh, people don't usually love this trilogy. Maybe I'll really like it. And it unfortunately turned out that I did enjoy Force Heretic 3. I thought that one was pretty solid. Not necessarily a top tier book in New Jedi Order for me, but a solidly enjoyable one. But unfortunately, the first two Force Heretic books, I would say, are my least favorite New Jedi Order books. And that just disappointed me because, like I said, I went in with hopeful expectations, not necessarily high expectations, because I was like, you know, people don't really like these. Maybe I won't like them either, but maybe I will, and hopefully I will. And so I went in hopeful to enjoy these, and unfortunately did not care for them. I found them mostly kind of boring, good ideas, good concepts, good setup for later books, but ultimately not super exciting in themselves, except for Force Heretic 3. I did enjoy Force Heretic 3. Last of kind of the main 5 things that I have to talk about here is actually a duology, which is the Innsmouth Legacy duology by Ruth Anna Emrys. This is a Lovecraft-inspired duology, kind of focusing on the aftermath of the short story The Shadow over Innsmouth, written by H.P. Lovecraft, in which you follow characters who are past Innsmouth residents, who learn that the residents of Innsmouth have been rounded up by the government and things like that because there's some weird stuff going on there. And this book kind of follows after that, so you learn about the way that these people are treated, and the people who used to live in Innsmouth are trying to reconnect with their heritage and things like that. This was a very interesting concept. I love the ideas that Emrys plays with in this series of especially the way she approaches the Lovecraft mythos of providing a very unique and different look at it. You know, in The Shadow over Innsmouth, the Innsmouth residents are seen as the enemy, are seen as the, you know, these weird, freaky people who, you know, you don't really want to associate with because they're hybrid humans and fish people. And so it's kind of looked at in a more negative light, and of course that's where a lot of the horror comes from in that story. And this one kind of flips that on its head and says, okay, what if we make these people able to empathize with them, make them, you know, humanize them a little bit, even though they're not technically humans, you know, do that kind of thing with them, and also approach the Cthulhu mythos from a very religious perspective of, like, what would it look like for people who are actually believe in these greater entities and gods and whatever, what would it look like for them to actually have religious belief in these characters? Which is a very interesting way to approach it. And I also think that thematically the way that this duology works is very interesting. But the main thing, again, for these books for me is I just found them very boring. I did not find the characters outside of the very central main character that interesting, and even the main character herself, her name's Afra, I didn't find her that exciting. And the plot, like, there were things happening, but it never felt like things were happening. It felt like I was always just kind of, like, stuff was happening on the page, but none of it was really exciting or engaging to me. And I just found this duology to be kind of boring and not that interesting. It is, I think, especially if you are someone looking for a very unique take on Lovecraft, it is certainly worth reading because it's very different and interesting, and especially for me as a big fan of Lovecraft, it was very interesting to see his concepts taken in such a different direction, and things like that. And I think this will appeal to a certain type of reader. I just don't think it's something that appeals to me particularly, which was unfortunate because I was really excited to read these. I heard, like, so many people who love Lovecraft praise these books as the best thing that has been done with the mythos since Lovecraft himself, or at least close to it. And unfortunately, it just didn't work for me. So those are the 5 kind of main things that I was disappointed by. I do also want to briefly mention one more as kind of a bonus, because this is a book that I did not finish, and that is Dead House Gates, the second book of the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. This was a disappointment for me for the purely because I decided not to finish it. Malazan is a series that I really would love to get into because I find the concept behind it very interesting. I really enjoy the writing style. I really enjoy just the idea of this very dense, very vast series where you really have to kind of put a lot of the details together yourself with a world that is just so expansive and deep and all these things. And it seems like almost everybody that, at least in terms of like booktube and things like that, that has finished this series really loves it. And so I want to also be at that point, but unfortunately it just didn't quite land for me. I DNF'd this about halfway through, and so I would like to give Malazan another try someday, but unfortunately right now is not the time, I think. But maybe someday it will be a good time for me to try this series again. So I just wanted to mention that because I was disappointed by this book, because I decided that for now it's going to be the end of my Malazan journey, even though it's something that I really want to get into. That just about wraps this video up. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books and perhaps you really enjoyed them, which if you did, then great, but I did not care for all of these books, unfortunately. If there were any books that you read in 2024 that you found disappointing or that you didn't really like or whatever it may be, let me know that in the comments as well. I wouldn't say any of these books were necessarily ones that I disliked, but I did find them disappointing, unfortunately. So that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.